All right.
You know, it has to start out with us laughing, right?
Yes, it has to.
This is how the podcast has to
Juan
start.
will be in tears by the end of it.
This is how it has to start. Tears for multiple reasons, too, for sure. There will be lots of sobbing, lots of laughing.
All right, take a drink, and then once you're done with that, I'll go.
No, that's all going on the show.
Okay.
Come on, we already started. I totally got him off his game. I
Yeah,
didn't even mean to.
I got it.
All right, sorry.
All right, here we go. Ready? Today we have a guest that I'm very excited to have here. This is Juan. I met Juan. I feel like that we just connected via Instagram a while ago, and I kind of created a little virtual friendship with him, and we actually went out and shot, 4 or 5 months ago, and my car broke down, and he was very helpful because it was in a very scary part of town, and he made me feel very safe. Juan, among other things, is a photographer, videographer, he makes custom sneakers, and he has recently started an apparel line. Juan is a guy that I call a secret genius. He is, in my opinion, somehow staying under the radar of what, in my opinion, could be something way, way bigger than what it is. So thanks for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just kind of jump into it here. Mac, why don't you tell the audience more about Juan and how you know Juan and just some things to kind of get the ball rolling with who Juan is and what he's about.
Well, a really good example of how Juan and I still to this day communicate is yesterday we were like jokingly talking about how much we rub off on each other for how little. Well, we interact a lot now in a group text with Kenny Myers, Mr. Unloved Ones. But prior to that, we always criticized each other, or we criticized our relationship for not talking enough, not communicating enough. But what we realized was we communicated way more than we thought because we both believed each other to be so authentic in what we posted. So like if I needed to talk to Juan, I really could go read a caption. I really could go look at a photo. I really could go the same way that he could. And that's actually how we connected. Juan started following me and being hyper supportive of me. Like I kept seeing like my stuff was getting reshared by Juan, and I didn't know that he was in St. Louis. I'm like, who's this guy with? This was before he went back to his larger account. He's got a couple accounts, and they're all built out substantially, but one is built out, to over 20,000 followers. And I was like, who is this guy that is like? It's abundantly clear that he's cooler than me, and it's abundantly clear that he's more authentic than me and more vulnerable than me, and it's abundantly clear
more talented than
me. He's more skilled than me. I'm like, let me find out that this motherfucker is better looking than me, and we're gonna have a problem. I'm like, all right, at least I got height on him. But and we just started talking. We just started talking from there, and we got like really, I think in the DMs, we got like real gritty right away. Like we're talking about past employment history and stuff, and like at the time that we connected originally, I think it was right around, was it Mike Brown or Stockley? It was I mean, if it was within the last 5 years, it was around any of that, right? And we started having a lot of conversations about that and about St. Louis. And then we finally we put our foot down and started. I came out one day while Juan was doing, you guys don't know, Juan is also very well established on Twitter and YouTube, and his YouTube channel is it's all things Juan. It's everything from photo and camera tricks to customizing the research and development on a custom, all the way to like actual work projects that he does. And I went out there to the studio and we did how to make your sneakers float, and we put on a bunch of different hats, literally and figuratively, and we busted a gut for 4 hours, into the dead of night, so to speak. And since then, we've just kept a rapport. We've shot numerous times. Juan gives me these photos that I never find myself being able to use, because I'm like, if I don't write the most gut-wrenching, soul-opening, mind-crushing, emotional piece to go with this thing with flames coming out of my heart, then I'm not going to do the photo justice. I think maybe I should just post a photo and let the photo do it.
That's right.
One thing, insert caption here.
Right. one thing about Juan that I want to kind of start talking about with you is,
You're not going to get to talk. We're just going to talk about how much we love you the whole time.
But
by the way.
one thing I want
we are his biggest
kind of
fans.
start with is that you mentioned all his attributes, which are all true, and even though we're laughing and joking, it's one thing that I don't know Juan as well as you do, but I will say that I think that one character trait that I notice about you the most in the few times I met you, and especially with your posts, is like authenticity. I think that you have a level of authenticity that is kind of unmatched around these parts. So can you talk to me about, a little bit about your authenticity and your relationship with your authenticity?
So, whenever I get ready to speak or talk to people about certain things, people know I'm getting serious when I say, let's unpack that. So we'll have to unpack that vulnerability. I think when we're talking about mental health, it's so important to unpack things. And so I saw on social media the hype that people do, the shock value stuff that people do, and that wasn't my thing. But it seemed like if you did that, that's how you became popular. And so, I got frustrated with it, and, that back and forth of, do I continue this or not? But I knew that in order just to be me, to be genuine me, for other people to see that and know that it's okay for them to be that, I needed to be that. And if I was trying to be something else, like I had been all my life, I've lived out in St. Charles County since I was in 5th grade. It was a huge culture shock for me because the area that I came from, I lived in the Kansas City, Missouri area. And so then I moved to the suburbs, and, it was a huge culture shock. And I spent my entire life trying to fit in with everybody here, to where I lost myself.
I can completely relate to that.
Yeah, I didn't, I was 25, 26, still not knowing who I was. And so.
Wait, are you telling my story right now?
Yeah. I'm reading directly out of your diary. Yes, out of your diary.
We regularly send gifts back and forth of mind reading. Regularly. Like, there's more gifts of, how did you just do that, in our text than there actually is any substance. You're right. Continue. Sorry.
So, so I began this quest of, I had to have been probably close to 30 of finding myself. And I thought that I was actually finding myself, and I was wrong. Like I was still going in the wrong direction. I was searching in areas areas I shouldn't have been. And then, I was trying to find myself through those posts. I always sat there and said, should I post this or not? It's pretty vulnerable, but I'm like, if I'm feeling this, somebody else has to.
Absolutely.
Like, I know I'm not the only person that feels this, but a lot of people aren't saying it. Like, I can see it, in their pictures. I'm really deep. I'm a huge believer in the eyes are the windows to the soul. And so, people would be posting these pictures and with the caption, but like, I'm looking in their eyes and I'm like, man, there's some hurt there. There's some pain there. This
is what you said to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is good.
Yeah.
And so what if, everybody's doing what's popular. Everybody's doing what's cool, what's trending, and vulnerability for some reason isn't. You just looked at John Legend and Chrissy Teigen. Like, she put her miscarriage out on social media, and there were so many people that said, why are you doing that? Like, are you just doing this for clout, or are you doing this? That's a pretty vulnerable moment for a family to share. And whether they're doing it for the right or wrong reasons, who are you to judge? Because maybe that gets someone else who is struggling and hurting and holding on to that pain of a miscarriage. Maybe it gets them to share their story, or maybe go seek therapy. And so, I wanted, at least myself, when I talk to a lot of people, when I give presentations, I try to say, be the example. And I practice what I preach, and so I have to be the example of that. And so I make sure that I'm being vulnerable. I mean, it's cleansing, emotionally for yourself too. Because a lot of times when I post that stuff, I will literally post it, and then I'll just put my phone down because I'm exhausted trying to put that caption together, to put it in the words of how I'm feeling, because sometimes you can't, like, I feel this, but I can't put it into words. And so, so you sit with it for a while, you digest it, and then you start typing and you delete, and then you type and you delete, and then you sit. And then once you finally get it out, you've gone through this emotional journey to put that out there.
I mean, it's public journaling,
right?
know? That hits home, like, I don't know, to a T with me, especially about having played the game with IG, right? So like we both played the game at different points in time through our love for sneakers, and that's what grew my account out. Like initially, like all of a sudden it was hitting where, like, I was posting frags and they were taken and, like hype style photos and stuff, and it grew it out. And then I was like, oh, well, I got their attention. Like, I gotcha. Now we're gonna talk about our emotions. And then it was like, oh, I lost 1,000 followers like in like 3 days. They're like, what are these like novels this kid is writing? But as the, I used the hashtags less, and as the captions got longer and the pictures got more what I wanted them to be instead of what I thought was going to catch a feature on a page, and stop shooting for features or whatever. The likes went down, the engagement went down, but the DMs went up. And then I think where we differ is you came to the conclusion way earlier than I did, where you were like, if I feel this way, someone else has to. I was like, Danny and I talk about on nearly every episode and basically every day, because it affects someone around us at all times. I was at that point in time terminally unique, right? I believed myself to be, what I was going through to be so bizarre and so unconventional, and the combination was so fucked that, like, I was like, well, I gotta tell people this so they get it. Like, I need you to understand, like, no, man, I'm fucked up. Like, I don't really care if you guys aren't, but if you're gonna hang out with me, or you're gonna follow, or you're gonna know anything about me, I want to make sure. And then I figured out what you said, what you were saying, that like, oh, somebody else has to be feeling this, because I put it out there. And then I'd wake up at 10 a.m. the next day, or 10 a.m. 2 or 3 days down the road, and in the message request in the DM, there would be an anonymous follower, or somebody from Ohio, or somebody from Manchester, UK, or Nova Scotia, or whatever, and they would say, I've never heard somebody say what I've been feeling the way that you did, or whatever. And then it was like, first of all, it was cool, because I was like, oh shit, I'm not alone. But then it was even cooler, because then I got to go to that person and go, yeah, you're not alone. Like, really though, I was hella excited about it, and we totally connected on that.
One thing you mentioned was that when you write your captions, you really put a lot of thought and effort to it, and it almost is like this emotional little mini journey that you kind of like have to go through. And what I want to kind of try to compare that to is with art, right? And being a sneaker customizer and an apparel, starting your clothing line and everything, I believe that like art is an extension or an expression of what's happening from it is the artist basically. So what I want to ask you is, it's almost even like with food. It's like when you eat some good food, it's usually made with love kind of thing, right? So for you, how are you using that not venue, but that what's the word here? Not a venue, but how are you using that avenue when you create your shoes and when you customize sneakers and you're making these shirts? How are you using that avenue to express yourself?
So that is more of a recent thing, because I think I started when I started trying to customize shoes, which I was horrible when I first started.
Gotta start somewhere.
When I started, I was trying to find that. Like, I was trying to figure out how to express myself. I was not good at art in high school. I sucked bad. The problem was there was this block of what I was seeing in my head and then getting it out down.
That's called the gap, the creative gap. That's what it's called.
Yeah. So that was, and then I was undiagnosed with ADD. I didn't get diagnosed with ADD until I was 26.
Really?
Until I was 26. The reason why I survived high school, well, first, the lady who tested me for ADD when I was 26, I took the test, got done, and she looked at me and she said, "Did you say you graduated high school?" I said, "Yeah, I graduated high school. I was actually on the dean's list in college." And she was like, "Oh, come here, baby," and gave me the biggest hug. And I'm hugging her like, "What's going on?" And she said, people who score what you score typically don't graduate high school.
Wild.
Said, how did you do it? And I was like, well, I knew I was going to get my butt beat if I didn't. Plus, I wanted to play sports, and so I had to make the grades in order to do that.
You were a baseball player, right?
So I was a baseball player. And so I was trying to, when I started customizing shoes, I was trying to figure out how to express myself. And it wasn't until I'd say sometime last year where I had, I don't know if you would say it's my rock bottom. I found myself in that dark place where it felt like there was nothing left. There was nothing else for me to do, and that the world was okay without Juan Wilson in it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people that I
My
called,
world.
I mean, I've felt that at
My
a point
world,
in my
man.
life too.
My world.
well, I found out later on, but one of the people that I called was a good friend who is a therapist, Michelle Stieg, and I talked to her, and she has now become my therapist. And one of the things that she recognized immediately in me was the parts of me that I had suppressed for so long was the weight that I had felt on my shoulders for so long. That weight finally came crushing down because I was going to the gas station. Like I was feeling pretty heavy, and I felt.
I love this story.
Yeah, I'm into it. I'm on the edge of my seat.
I've heard this a couple times. I love this.
Well, I felt like I couldn't breathe, and so
Act it out for us.
What was that?
Said act it out for us.
It's way scarier than that. That's it's terrifying.
I'm only here to keep him laughing, folks. I'm only here to keep him laughing.
Because I mean, all
This
due
does
aside,
not take away from the story. I promise you.
yeah,
I'm only here to keep him
that
laughing.
feeling is a for real scary. It is.
Yeah.
It's like you're dying.
Well, it feels like somebody or something is literally like putting pressure onto your chest, and you're trying to breathe. And so my daughter was home, and I said, "Hey, do you want something from the gas station?" I said, "I'm gonna get some gas. I just need to get some air." And she's like, "Yeah, I'll take a Dr. Pepper." We take turns going to the gas station and getting each other drinks or snacks. And so
Your daughter's a grown woman. Just for the
she's-
reference here.
yeah, she's 20 now. Oh yeah. But so I go to the gas station and I get gas, and I feel like I'm just going through the motions. I get gas and then keep it moving, and so I get gas, and I go out, pull out onto the street, and when I pull out onto the street, I'm like, I forgot my daughter's soda. Well, when I said that, my brain said, guess what else you forgot? And it took me all the way back to 5th grade when I first moved here, and I went to play basketball down the street at a friend's house. And I went to go swim. We played basketball, which is how I got my scar on my shoulder. That's another story. But
Take your shirt off. Show it to us.
I went to go swimming, and he goes inside, and then he comes back out, and his dad comes out and tells him to come here, and he goes over to his dad, and then he comes to me and says, "Hey, do you have a shower cap?" I'm like, "Shower cap?" I mean, my head's like, my hair's shaved all the way off and stuff. I'm like, "No, why would I have a shower cap?" He's like, "Well, my dad said that people like you, your hair sheds in pools and clogs up the filter, and so you can't swim unless you have a shower cap." And like, because this is during George Floyd, and so I froze. And so like every microaggression, every racial thing that was done towards me, and then every trauma from 5th grade on all slammed me in the face at the same time. And I felt like I could barely drive. Like my arms were frozen, and my skin was burning, and I couldn't breathe, and tears just started streaming down my face, and I had to pull off into a parking lot, and I just sat there, and I was like, there is nothing, like, no one should have to feel this. And like, the weight is so heavy. It's like, I don't deserve this, and I don't want to feel this anymore. And so I had a couple of choices to make. Do I continue living or do I not? And I decided to make a phone call. The first phone call wasn't very helpful, but then the second one was, and
You called me on the first one, and I just did what I'm doing in this conversation.
right.
Is you crying?
Why are you crying, man? Suck it up. But no, I made it home, and I think that the other saving grace was not only Michelle Stieg talking to me home. Another good friend who's a therapist, Taylor Klump, also talked to me a little bit to help.
Tell her that she needs to be on the show.
She'll be on the episode. She'll be on the
Because
episode.
we found her because of you.
Which camera do I look at?
All of them.
All of them.
Right there.
The middle. Taylor. It's your boy Juan. This podcast, it's going to happen.
You heard it here first, folks.
Okay.
Moving on.
All right. I got home and I'm just at that point, I people were confirming that I was worthy. People were confirming that I needed to be here and that they love me. But I was still kind of like not sure. And my daughter came into my room, and I was sitting on my bed, and I'm getting emotional on this one. I was sitting on my bed, and I looked up at her, and she just looked at me, and I said, "Your dad doesn't feel okay. I don't feel good, and I'm struggling." And she started to tear up and just came over, rushed me, and just gave me the biggest hug and told me how much she loved me, and we just hung out. And so I had her, her and I, our story together is a pretty crazy, a lot of trauma through that. But, the fact that, I'm good. My daughter was right there. Do it again.
I thought about it so bad.
Do it. We'll replay. We'll play. Yep. Do it.
Yeah. That's good. That can be a thing. All right, that's good.
But so in talking to Michelle Stieg, it was recognizing that there are parts of me that, she huge theory with parts therapy. My first assignment was to watch a cartoon. It was Inside Out.
Real quick, when my daughter's mother and I first split up, that movie came out, and one of the first things we did together with Gia, like when she was real little, was to go see that movie. And I'm not even kidding, we had to leave because I couldn't control myself. I was a wreck. I mean, I was like literally, and we had to leave.
Yeah, because
we had to leave.
Well, I was. I didn't know that I had depression when I was a kid. I didn't know that I had ADD when I was a kid. And so I wanted to be that example of what the world should be, what the world should have. And so I wanted to have a smile on my face every single time. I wanted joy in the world. And so no matter what the situation was, I wanted to be that positive person that brought that out in everybody. And so no matter what trauma, no matter what pain I had, I made sure that I always wore a smile on my face. And so I always wanted joy to win. And then in that movie, in those parts to where I'm realizing that is me. That is me. That, like, it broke me down to realize that sadness was a hero in the movie. So she and I are still working through that, because I remember I was at work and I'm sitting in my desk, and this is how awesome she is. I'm sitting in my desk, and all of a sudden I just feel depression symptoms coming on, and I just want to sink down low. I want to sleep. I want to cry. And so I just text her. I'm like, "Hey, I'm feeling this," and blah blah blah. She's like, "Well, let's talk about that. What's going on?" And so I'm telling her, And she goes, how amazing is that? And I'm like, shut up. She's like, no, because we have protectors, we have defenders that protect us. These defenders protect us from feeling certain things, and it protects us from feeling sadness. It protects us from feeling hurt and some of these things in our traumas. And so, I was telling her how something had happened, and she said, isn't that amazing? Your protector, what a beautiful distraction your depression is for your anger. And so I went back again to things that my dad taught me when I was younger, of don't be quick to anger, because it makes you look bad.
Weak, right?
It makes you look weak, but then also being a black man,
Right.
you get labeled as the angry black man. And so like I had carried all of this through, and so somehow depression became my protector from
Better to be that than this.
than to be that, because
Right.
I shut down
Right.
when I get angry, and realizing that like it locked me up, and like I just uncontrollably sobbed in my office, and she said, text me back when you're ready. And so I text her back. I'm like, I'm almost 40 years old. I'm finding out more about myself
Yep.
than at that time when in middle school you're supposed to be finding out about yourself.
That's what I'm trying to make him go to therapy.
I mean,
I went.
Well, it's, middle school is a tough time, and that's a lot of time when kids figure out who they are. In high school, once you get to high school, you start to solidify that and you confirm it. Well, in middle school, I just moved here and I didn't fit in, and so I tried to be so many other things other than myself,
I completely understand that.
to where middle school, I didn't figure out who I was. High school, I didn't figure out who I was. College, I didn't figure out who I was. I was in a bad relationship. I was trying to be everything I could be for that relationship instead of myself. And I found myself divorced and by myself, looking at like, who am I? And so I think for the clothing and for the customs, a lot of times each one is an expression of a different part
Yeah.
of me,
Of the journey.
of the journey, and accepting, learning how to let all those parts coexist, because that's the whole thing. Is what if we could let all those parts coexist instead of letting them control us? If we could let them coexist and be a part and let them have their day, let them have their moment, their time, because there are times that, yeah, you've got to be angry. There are times you got to be sad. I mean, crying is so healthy therapeutically, physically. You have to let those parts have their place, because it helps you balance out who you are. It makes you more human too. And so, this one, it speaks for itself. I mean, the whole part of like the Mario design, that is a personal story as well.
For sure.
But because like I don't just look at something and say I want to make it like that because I think that's cool. There are always hidden stories within everything that I do, and so that's kind of where these customs and these clothes come from. It's my trauma, personal stories, learning that other people sharing theirs, and just kind of share, expressing that for everybody else.
Danny got this out of me like better than anyone had. I hadn't figured it out. I hadn't figured it out in my relationship with fashion to the depth at which I have recently, until Danny started posing these kind of questions to me, which is why we were actually a big part of why we kind of reformatted the podcast to integrate Danny in more as now an equal participant, but as a guide, because he's like guided me into getting like so much more out in ways that I couldn't have originally imagined. But I identified that fragmented identity that we're left with whenever we get home after having been so many different things throughout the day, to meet so many different people, and you know, being the white black guy, the black white guy, the good kid, the bad kid, the whatever we needed to be to fit in all these different spaces, and then you come home and you're left with this kind of like pillowcase full of like different rappers, and you're like, well, which one is mine? For me, like all those rappers were like, it was like, for how I learn, the easiest way for me to identify all these different versions of me was by like how these different groups of people dressed, right? And so then it was like, well, what if I want to? It took me till I got sober to understand that I could dress all these different ways, right? It didn't matter where I was. I could put on what I wanted, where I wanted, with whoever I wanted, no matter what. I didn't have to be the prep with the preps or whatever. But like that, that tied in. I didn't begin to really understand how much I associated identifying groups of people and versions of myself with fashion until just recently. But one of the things that you talked about real early, you talked about depression as a protector. You and I talked about the polarity that we felt and how guilty we feel for, like, we are the nice guys, like we're the happy guys, we're everybody's best friend, and then going to therapy and we're like, to our therapist, like, well, how in the fuck could I possibly be this angry then? And then my therapist comes back to me and goes, well, doesn't that make sense to you? That, like, for equally and inversely, for how angry you are in one direction, you're inversely happy and pouring it out publicly and in the other direction. And I was like, well, so does that mean that my happiness and like my positivity and my human connectivity, does that mean that that's inauthentic? And she goes, no, it just means that you're not acknowledging the authenticity to this anger. Because when I would finally unload, people that are angry all the time say, oh, you don't want to see me angry. It's like, no, the motherfucker you don't want to see angry is the guy that is never angry, right? The motherfucker you don't want to see angry is like, you don't want to see Juan Wilson angry. Like, you don't want me to tell you what I'm capable of putting into words in a negative direction. Like, you don't want, like, you're using a hotline when you're done, like, whenever you're done getting in, if you want to see, like, for every angel that, we put out in front of people because we want them to know that they're there for them, there's an equal or more powerful demon, that angel is specifically there to hold back. And for you, it's depression. For me, it was that codependency with my social, with my social standing, and that codependency with my anxiety, where it was like, yeah, I'd rather like be a mess than be mad. I'd rather be scatterbrained and play victim, that I'm like, so that I don't know how to tie my shoes the same way the normal person does, than be the guy that's mad that I can't. I'd rather go like, I'd rather be kind of all over the place and embrace that, and then make that like my crutch, than have my crutch be the guy that's mad that I can't do anything.
Right. One thing you mentioned while you were talking earlier is that you found yourself, in middle school, as we develop, high school we kind of like hone in, and then like it kind of like leads into life, and we kind of know who we are. For me, I moved in 5th grade. Now, granted, I'm a Jewish white guy, but I'm a white guy, perceived normal white kid. And even for me, during those times, I was so far away from myself that I was acting or reacting to life based on what I thought other people thought of me. And it was a huge hindrance to my development. So I was hoping you could talk a little about, I had a complete lack of self in those developmental years. I was obsessed with acting in a way that people expected me to be, because I just was so far away from who I was. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, and what I was going to say too is that, I'm 38, you're 39, so we're essentially the same age. At the beginning of 2020, I started to do some intense therapy because I had the time. Coronavirus started, so it was all via Zoom. I'm lucky enough to have a therapist through the Jewish Family Federation, so it's free therapy, which is a huge blessing because that shit can get pricey. But I found myself going through these things. A lot of my stuff involves my dad, and like both my parents were these very great, loving, caring people. We had everything we needed, but my dad tried to protect me from life because he wanted me to feel safe versus like understanding that like you have to go through things to like figure it out, right? So there was times throughout this, and I was doing like therapy twice a week, right, where I would get like angry. I was like, why? And you kind of like, why the fuck am I this age and I'm just now fucking figuring this stuff out? Or like, and it was two feelings. One, I was angry about it, but then the second one was like, I also realized that I couldn't have gotten to where I am in this without going through the stuff I've been through before. It's like I would have never, just like with your shoes, it's like you would have never got to the point where you are now customizing your shoes had you not started and tried it and like been bad at it. So for you, I want you to kind of talk about like the journey as far as like the understanding that, especially when we try to better ourselves and become better people and unpack our stuff, like you said, on the unpacking, it's like that in and of itself is valuable, right? So I was hoping if you could talk to me about your journey in your process of like kind of like discovering or rediscovering yourself.
Well, I think it starts off with having those very, very difficult conversations. If we look at social media right now with politics and how everything is, and the big conversation right now is how do we teach U.S. history in schools?
We shouldn't. No, I'm just kidding.
Kids, I think people need to get off of the idea of, well, when I was younger, I had to do this, so you should have to do this.
Well, teach them how to start a fire with sticks, and then teach them about taxes.
Well, and that's the thing is like,
right? Skip everything in between. Right?
Our kids have it so much more difficult than we had it. Even though we had to walk uphill in 5 foot of snow to get to school.
One boot that we all had to share.
2 miles both ways. Right?
Uphill both ways. Yeah, for sure.
Even though we had to do that, our kids right now are wearing masks and are disconnected from their teachers, from their other friends, their social distancing. They're learning through a Zoom.
Everything's evergreen.
Right.
That's what freaks me out, is that, and I can imagine you guys being parents, but that show Euphoria on HBO. If you guys haven't seen it, I'm not advocating for a show because it's a great show. I'm advocating for a show because like I've never identified more with individual characters as an adult and as a kid. It's the inner social workings of high school, as it relates to drug addiction, as it relates to social cues, whatever. But what I mean by evergreen is, you're talking about the kids right this moment, but generally speaking, too. Whenever you had a rumor about you in high school, right? That's what it was, right? It was a rumor, and maybe it got written down on a piece of paper, it got written in the bathroom wall, those kind of things. Now, you have 14-year-old girls in videos, and it ends up on the internet. And even though the gossip cycle for these guys still is relatively short because another horrible thing happens, that stuff's up there permanently. What like cyberbullying, and like if you identify your image with what you're putting out online, and then somebody destroys your image online, I mean, your life is over until you I mean, it's not like you deal with a week of being the P-Pants kid or whatever the fuck, and then the next week it's not there. You know what I mean? It's not like it was for us. Like, we thought everything in middle school and high school was the absolute end of the world, and then a week went by and it wasn't anymore. Now, these kids are, in addition to managing, to figuring out how to measure their value and worth through all the stuff that we did, and then all this extra stuff. And now it's like, if you don't get likes on TikTok, like, you're not as valuable. If you don't go viral, or if you don't ask the girl out on Instagram live at halftime, like, then you didn't ask the girl out. Now, like, the standards, like, the stakes are so much higher for these kids. Like, I wouldn't wish it on anyone.
Yes, and then to that point, it's all taking away from self. It's all diminishing the self. So if we can go back to what your response, I want to hear more about your take on the value of self and the value of identifying who you are because in my opinion, as a parent and as a person who was in the education world for almost 10 years before I started doing all this, and I I feel strongly that we should be teaching our kids from an early age the value of self, and self-care should be as fundamental as science, math, English, and reading. It's almost, in my opinion, more important. It's like no human can go out in the world and succeed at math, science, English, or history if they don't know who they are. So if you can, go back to the value of self-awareness and self-care for you.
And I guess we should make it clear, Juan works in education now and works with youth. So that's I think that's more important to this, to give you guys more insight directly with them and in intimate settings on a large scale. So which gives this, to give you guys proper context.
So I think, like, to what you guys were saying, it's so important, for our teachers to be able to give that that self-love, that self-care to our kids. And I know it's hard for teachers now because it's adding another thing onto. I mean, they're preparing, curriculum via Zoom.
Teachers are as much social workers right now. In general, but
right,
especially right now.
Well, because not only do you have to make sure that your kids are getting the right grades, but then if they're not understanding, is it the actual curriculum, the material that they're not understanding? Is something going on at home? And I'll tell you this, the virtual portion of it has given a lot of teachers across the country insight into the homes and the lives that some of these kids experience and the trauma that they experience. And so, for me, I was lucky, talking about my ADD, the reason why I survived high school was because I had a couple of teachers who were my go-tos, that they reached out to me and met me where I was at and were able to kind of pull me along. And so I was actually still interested in school and helped me along. That's that, being able to feel that you're worthy of love, that you're valuable. I mean, it's almost everything, because, my favorite book is The 5 Love Languages. And yes, I would recommend anybody to read that.
Have you done the workbook with it?
I
You have done the workbook. Yeah, yes. We've talked about this. Yeah, I have it on my nightstand.
So men, however macho you think you are, read the 5 love languages. That will break you down. It helped me as I went through my divorce. It helped me just personally to help me understand how other people loved me, because at one point, that's why every single day in the morning on Twitter, I put out, "I love you. You are worthy of love."
This tweet goes viral every day, by the way.
I personally, I don't schedule it. I personally type it in and tweet it. And sometimes it's at 7 o'clock in the morning. There's sometimes that it's at like noon or 2 p.m. And a lot of it is because there are times that I don't even want to pick my phone up, and literally I don't want to engage with anybody. But I remind myself that every day there's somebody out there that needs to be told that, that somebody loves them and that they're worthy of love. And so no matter how much I don't, want to get on social media, I make sure that I do that, because we are human beings. The way that we're wired is for human connection. And, whether it's a science thing, whether it's a, religious thing, we are wired for human connection. It's the reason why we feel certain ways when someone tells us something, when somebody looks at us a certain way, when they touch us, whether it's a negative or a positive. Like, if we weren't wired for that, we would have no reaction, no emotion over that. And so we are wired for that. And it makes it, that's why our country is so crazy right now, is because the social distancing, we're so disconnected from one another, and how politics.
Not to mention the political aspect, where it's like almost a choice to be separate, like a conscious effort to like disassociate with what you don't agree with.
Right. And so for me, it was, and that was my struggle, trying to figure out who I was. Not only not knowing who I was, I didn't feel like I belonged. And so that contributed to a lot of my depression. I never really had a sense of belonging. And so
I'm sorry to interrupt, but as you say these things, and this kind of happened last week when we talked with Kathleen, but it's like, I get so frustrated that I don't fully understand how in our culture and society, it isn't glaringly obvious that self-awareness and self-care and self-identification is fundamental to everything else.
It doesn't benefit the people in power.
But well, that's the obvious answer. But that in and of itself is sickening, because what are we valuing as a society and culture? And we're valuing money and power. We're basically saying like, but all jokes aside, it's like, you know, I'm sitting here talking to you. You're an almost 40-year-old black man in America, and you're a former police officer. You are in the education world now. You're a creative person. I still think you're a secret genius. And here you are, still on this very emotional, visceral, real journey of like discovering yourself. Like, it's great, and I mean, like, we're doing it too. But it's like, in the same breath, it's like, that's fucking horseshit, man. It's like, how is it even possible that we don't see the value of this? Like, why isn't this like paramount? Like, why isn't this the most important thing in your? I mean, like, I just, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but what are your thoughts on that?
There's one huge glaring word that no one wants to talk about, and that word is privilege. I, even as a black man, didn't want to talk about privilege so I moved to St. Charles County in 5th grade. My dad, once we moved here, was making 6 figures. Before that, dirt poor. I mean, times we were sitting at the kitchen table, holding hands, praying for our next meal. So, like, my experience was I got to see the struggle. I got to, all my clothes were Salvation Army, Goodwill. I mean, some of them were straight up donations because my parents couldn't even pay that. I remember Fridays, right after school, hopping in the car with my mom, and her flying to the electric company to pay the bill so we can have the electric turned back on for the weekend. Like, that was my life before moving to St. Charles County. And so once I moved to St. Charles County, I got to see how good my dad was doing and how he was making it. And so I had this idea of, like, if you just work hard enough, you can have anything you want.
Ha!
Like, you can, if you just believe, and as SpongeBob says, with a little bit of magic, you can succeed and achieve all your dreams. And so I had this idea that my dad worked hard, and so when people would say, oh, there's a such thing as privilege or even white privilege, I'm like, no, there's no such thing, because if you just work hard enough. And then people were like, well, how did you make it? I'm like, shoot, my dad worked hard, blah blah blah. Then I had to realize that I had a dad.
Right.
Like, I had a dad that was there, who worked hard, who made sure. I mean, I remember my dad working so hard that one time he slept for 24 hours straight just to make sure that our family had, food on the table and everything. And a lot of kids don't have that, white or black. And so I had the privilege of having a dad. My car when I was a senior in high school sucked. I worked on it and everything, but it wasn't a great car. But no matter how bad my car was, I had a car.
Exactly.
So I had the privilege of having a car.
Right.
And so that's that when we talk about privilege and understanding actually what that is. And there are different facets of it. You have privilege, you have white privilege, but privilege is if you have the privilege of having a support system and having people who love you around you all the time, it's easy for you to not worry about or ignore the blaring signs of someone struggling with depression in front of you, because either you don't know how to identify it, you've never seen it before. I mean, it's kind of same thing right now. There are still people that, like, today, February 8th, is it the 8th?
Something like that.
Something like that. 2021, that will tell me racism doesn't exist.
As you were just saying all this stuff, it's kind of like washing over me the realization that I'm sort of already aware of. It's like, I ask these kind of broad questions or rhetorical questions like, why aren't we making this a focus? And as you speak, I'm realizing it's like, some people just don't know. It's not even like in their realm of reality. And like in my mind, it's like, how the fuck do they not know this stuff? But then it's like, wait a second, who am I to not really judge, but who am I to, I'm lucky enough to, like you said, have the privilege of, having my parents be married for the 17 years before they got divorced. And even when they got divorced, they were very supportive and they gave me everything I wanted and needed. And so it's like, it's a very fine line, this whole thing, right? Mac, can you talk a little bit about, from your point of view, as far as the idea of, although different, you've both had your own struggles, but you're a white guy coming from a relatively upper middle class white family in a predominantly black community. Not that that's really part of the question, but for you, can you talk about a little bit about your privilege and how it affected your journey through this whole mental health stuff?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that, because that's something that Juan and I identify on too, is just these different versions of like flip-flopping, right? So, my parents were both came up dirt poor, and they're both attorneys, and they're both extremely successful now, but both still, my mom went private practice after 35 years working for EEOC, doing employment and civil rights law for the government. So, I always was like raised under this like position of integrity about my parents, that they were one of the good guys, and where my dad is a criminal defense attorney, but he was for state PD and federal public defenders, where, some of his buddies and his colleagues, are making millions, right, in driving Lamborghinis, and my dad is, in what feels like 50 years, it hasn't been, but what feels like, almost 40 something years in being one of the good guys. It's not keeping criminals on the street. It's making sure that men and women get actual due process, right? And so I always like, kind of held that near and dear to me, where it's like, these guys got into upper middle class, they got into six figures, they got up into middle class, with integrity and with care, and they didn't take the get rich quick scheme once they became attorneys. And I carried that a lot. It was one of the reasons, that my parents believed in going to public school. They're like, well, we love U City and we love what U City is about, and this is why we moved here, and we're gonna send, our kids to U City schools. And in that, then I kind of experienced what I got, these really great reminders from my mom's side of the family when we would see them, because a lot of them were still lower income and a lot of them were North County. And I got a reminder, like where my mom came from, 10 kids, 2 bedrooms, the whole deal. And I didn't ever have to experience that. But when I started out at U City in high school, I saw my privilege firsthand nearly immediately, as I didn't want anyone to know. Because to be cool at U City, you didn't have to be. Most of the kids that were cool had a story, whether it was a neighborhood, or whether it was fighter, or whether it was rapper, or whether it was class clown, or whatever. But all of the coolest kids were all kids of low income, and almost entirely black kids. And so it was like, okay, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to be these kids? Okay, well, deny my privilege, deny my blessings, feel bad about it. And that's as far as it ever went for me. Was after high school, I figured that part out relatively quickly, to not vilify myself for having been blessed with the stuff that my parents gave. But as it pertained to white privilege, that has been something that, to this day is like a brutal conversation of self-discovery and understanding, because I remember a couple months ago I wrote a post about how I'm still racist, right? And it kind of blew up. So it was like, we will never understand how programmed we are in spaces
right.
to just be racist, right? I saw firsthand regularly in U City. I would have my car packed full of my friends, all black kids. There'd be 6 of us in a car that should fit 5. Whether we were smoking weed or going to play basketball, it didn't matter. If we got flagged and pulled over in U City, every single black kid in the car got pulled out. I had the option to, dump my little dime bag of weed out on the ground and pour my little beer out. And then they would tell me to get my pretty ass back in the car and leave. And I would refuse to leave whenever I started like getting buck and got older and knew that like cops couldn't do as much as like we would allow them to do or whatever, that I at least had some rights, you know, because I learned that from my parents. So my dad would tell me that my police were as dangerous as most of the friends I was hanging out with. He's like, you know, well, if you're gonna be doing what you're gonna be doing, I at least need to teach you this, you know. But you know, in all seriousness, you know, what would happen is they would say things, they would expose themselves very quickly, that whether or not they believe this to be true themselves or they believed it to be true within their jobs or whatever. And this isn't a commentary on police as much as it is, you know, meant to be about society and culture, but where it was like, any of y'all motherfuckers got warrants? I know y'all got warrants. Who's got their older brother's ID? Your older brother probably got warrants. All of you guys are going, you know, and it was like, hey, rich, pretty white boy, go home. We're not going to bother with you because we know your mom and dad are going to fix these tickets, whatever. So we're not even going to bother with you. But you motherfuckers, on the other hand, you know, like already being like off the bat being treated as hopeless, you know, like off the bat, when in reality, you know, it's not sad. It's sad. The whole entire thing is sad, but it's not sad to say this. It's actually kind of funny, but I was probably the biggest shithead out of
the ringleader. I can see that like, completely.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, for
with that
sure.
Devilish little grin.
I was like, your older brother's got guns. Let's go.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Bro, like no, like you know,
right.
You know, they're like, I'm trying to go to the, you know, I'm trying to be this, I'm trying to be that. Like, you know, most of my friends, yeah, we would nickel and dime weed or whatever. Like we would nickel and dime selling weed or this or that, basically so we could smoke for free.
Mm-hmm.
But like most kids in high school that were still in high school were not trying to be, it wasn't just trying to be a rapper, trying to be a ball player. Granted, that was the dream for nearly all of us in one way, shape, form, or another. But it wasn't, in U City, there was a large population of kids. It wasn't their only way out. Now, there was a ton of kids in U City where it most certainly felt like it was their only way out, and who am I to say that it wasn't? But like a lot of my friends, they were early on, like, trying to go to trade schools. Mm-hmm. They were trying to go to college. They were following all the processes they had. They were doing the same stuff that white kids of privilege were doing in Kirkwood. They were just selling weed.
Right.
Everything else they were doing was the same. They were playing football. They weren't good enough to go to college, or they weren't good enough to go to the NFL. They were playing football. They were part of, you know, or marching band or whatever, and then they were just selling weed. Like, how many of our friends do we know that are millionaires now that sold weed in high school? You know, but whenever they sold weed in high school, they got a ticket.
Yeah, man.
Their mom and dad got them out of it. And like my friends that, you know, my friends of color, anything that they did on any scale was exponentially worse, and then there was no way possible for it to not be exponentially more damaging.
Right.
To the, you know, I mean, Juan and I would talk about this too, just the U City on out north, and the prison industrial complex and the way that it works on a small scale on the way up north through Veneta Park, St. Anne, Ferguson, Normandy, all these places. Is like my black friends were getting caught up with traffic ticket warrants
right
at the age of 16 that then kept them in and out of county and in and out of tiny little municipalities, forcing their families, their baby mamas, their brothers, they're forcing anyone that could to get whatever money they could to get them out long enough to get another fucking traffic ticket, because they didn't have money, because they were giving it all to get out of tickets,
right,
to get the fucking expired plates on the fucking car fixed to begin with. You know, the system, I mean, and I know that we could get hyper political quickly, but as it pertains to privilege, you know, it really, there's no denying it in any space. Mm-hmm. And you know, I want to be clear. I think about it when I think about my white friends that have struggled and that have had really, really hard upbringings. It in no way, shape, or form diminishes anyone else's struggle. It in no way, shape, or form slaps privilege onto low-income white people or anything of that sort. All it does is say flat out, your life could be the hardest life on earth, the hardest life anyone has ever had could actually be a white kid in America. One white kid in America might take the cake for the hardest life ever. But nothing about his life was made harder because he was white.
Right.
And that's privilege, you know?
Yep.
And when I saw how that started to work in my life, that became a big reason why I wanted to do this podcast, why I wanted to write, why I wanted to start talking, why I haven't left St. Louis to go somewhere cooler, is because I have, through these relationships with men like Juan and people that have come before him, I want to be somebody that can show, yo, you can still have a really, really great life.
Yep.
You can still really be an amazing person. You can still connect with everybody. You can still have all these awesome friends. You can still be rich and fucking famous and operate in vain of your privilege.
Yeah, one element of privilege that I want to transition to, and we're going to have to start wrapping it up soon because we've been talking. This has gone by so quick because we're kind of in the zone, which I very much like.
I haven't even made Juan cry from
He
laughing
got from laughing. From
but
laughing.
usually I get some tears out of him from laughing.
So one element of privilege that I want you to talk about, Juan, is the privilege to.
Shoot, so.
What's that?
We got to do our photo shoot.
So,
I'll get it out of them then.
But one privilege I want to talk about is the privilege to be able to talk about feelings and emotions, and I think that in our society and culture, you know, traditionally women have more of a privilege in that sense to be able to freely express themselves without being looked at as like weak or anything. One thing that we're doing here, this is three dudes who are probably perceived to be relatively cool, good guys. We are definitely talking about our feelings and unpacking stuff. So for you, Juan, you know, especially being a black man, talk to me about the value of for you personally to be able to, as comfortable as it is sometimes, to be able to talk about your feelings and the value it brings to you in your life, and maybe encourage others to do the same.
So right now, I always get sucked into it watching certain movies or videos about slavery during Black History Month. And I watched Antebellum last night.
Oof.
And that was a lot to unpack, but it's so contradictory and so ironic, the fact that, number one, it's toxic masculinity that keeps men from sharing their emotions and feelings, because the one that they tell you that if another man tells another man that he loves them, automatically you're gay.
That's outrageous.
So
I do love you.
I love you too. But
rightfully so.
But you know, so we put this expectation on men to be tough, and then we wonder why the suicide rates for men are the way that they are. And then you look into the Black community, it's, you know, you definitely don't talk about mental health. And so
can you give a little, can you give a little insight on that in the Black community, just a tiny bit? I think I understand it, but if you can give a little bit on that.
I think everything stems from slavery. You know, watching Antebellum last night, you know, you think about the times where slaves were working in the fields and they weren't allowed to talk. They you know, it was that don't speak until you're spoken to. And so, you know, we're conditioned to be more silent, because then if we are louder, if we are more vocal, then we're perceived as something else, in a negative connotation. And so, you know, a lot of the times it's easier just to be quiet, but like recognizing not only that, but it's also a kind of thing of, I mean, you look at past generations, you know, you look at your Black grandma or grandpa, they don't believe, who are most of your therapists?
Older white people.
You know,
older white women usually.
And so to trust, you know, someone of a different race, specifically a white person, with your emotions and feelings, you know, and a lot of Black people would tend to say that they would never really understand how they felt. And so I wanted to, for me, I wanted to defy kind of both of those, because I want Black men, specifically Black men, to talk more about their emotions and feelings, because I think Black men as a whole in this country are very angry.
Rightfully so.
And so we're like, because that's the thing, is like your traumas never go away, because, you know, you can say that, we're free in this country. There are a lot of limitations, a lot of things that happen to make you feel less than. I remember as part of a movie that Denzel Washington was in, he was talking about slavery and how the goal of slavery was to keep black people's minds weak, but the body strong, because the bodies needed to be strong in order to work, to do the work, but they needed to keep the mind weak so they didn't feel that they were valued,
keep them in control,
or worthy, and so that way they could have better control. And what you see now is you have black people, and that's why a lot of black people are so frustrated and angry right now, is because as we continue to try to strengthen our minds, there are a lot of roadblocks and a lot of things, psychological. I mean, that was the whole thing. It was psychological warfare to break you down mentally. I mean, that's why they, they would take black babies during slavery and they would bury them and just keep their head above the dirt, and they would kick the baby's head sometimes so the baby's head came clean off the body. There were slaves that were meant specifically for breeding. Literally, exactly what they were for. Like, so you think about all these things, and what got me last night, and I think that's the conversation, because when we talk about privilege and we talk about why it's so hard to discuss it, for me, and people are like, well, why are you so angry about that? That happened 400 years ago, which I used to be that way, because I used to say, you know what, that was that long ago. How do we can't go forward if we continue to dwell on that. But that was me before I finding who I am, and like I learned, and actually it put it in perspective. If I was born just a few years ago, some years earlier than what I was born, there's no denying I would be a slave. There's no during slavery, there's no question of maybe I would have been a slave or maybe I might not have been. No, because of my skin color, I would have been a slave. I would have had to been, because that's what black people were then. And so when you put it into that perspective and say, if I were born some years earlier, that literally would be me. And I think a lot of people don't look at it in that context. When you talk about putting yourself into someone else's shoes, when we talk about being empathetic versus sympathetic, putting yourself into someone else's shoes to say, well, I that's not me, that wouldn't have been me. Or a lot of people, and a lot of white people get afraid to talk about it because immediately that guilt that comes on. And then also, well, I never owned any slaves. I get that. And I'm not asking you to imagine yourself if you own slaves. I'm asking you to be able to have this conversation. I need you to put yourself in the shoes of a slave to understand the optics of what that would look like and what you might experience, to make you able to be able to have that courageous conversation, because that's really what they are.
Right.
They're courageous conversations because they are very, very uncomfortable. I'm a black person. It's uncomfortable for me. The picture that I painted for you of the baby being buried, if you have kids, because people, well, I'm white. Right. Picture you have kids. Picture that happened to your kid. Yes, you do have a connecting factor to this. Yeah. Because you can put yourself, if someone was trying to harm your child.
Yeah. Well, that trauma is handed down from generation to generation. If people operate in denial of, well, it didn't happen to you. It's if you think that one generation back, there is a substantial amount of people whose great grandparents, we're not talking about that far back, right, where
pretty recent
actual slaves or born into slavery. Okay, whatever. They were born into slavery, and at 5, they're free, whatever. But we're not talking about that far back here. If you think about everything that's changed we don't think about everything that's changed from 2000 to 2020. We think about, like, we lump it all together, like the 90s to 2020 for us. Once we got to a certain age, everything was kind of the same. But like, if you really think about it,
yeah, man,
you know, it's like 30 years is a long fucking time in the amount of things that in the amount of things that have changed. But it's also really, really short if you think about it, in the amount of things that haven't changed.
When
like 400 years isn't shit.
Right. And like you were 81, right? So he was 81. I'm born in 82. I mean, like 30 years from that is like pre-civil rights. Like it's like legit, like Jim Crow laws, the whole thing. To kind of bring it back to the male thing, because I wanted to keep this. I want you to respond to, because I got you sidetracked and made it about black men. But I want to hear your response to the value of men in nowadays being willing to talk about their feelings and understanding that these conversations, whether it's on a microphone or in private, like, are important. I want to hear your take on that real quick, and then we got to wrap it up.
So one, it encourages other men to do the same, because that's the thing. Like, that's what connected, you know, Mac and I saw his post, and like the amount of vulnerability in his, like, immediately when I saw his post, I was like, that's that dude. Like, I could for real sit down and talk to that dude. Like I feel like I already know him. I have to meet him. I have to know his story closer, and I want him to know mine. I want him to know how close we are already, and we haven't even had a discussion.
Right, and that's what I always say. For my info, when I do my own podcast, In Focus, the whole premise is that we're all connected. And when we share our stories, we will find very, very quickly whether it's something abstract or something concrete. Like, we all are the same. We all want to love and be loved. We all want to be cared for. We all want to care. We all want shelter. We all need. It's like if you just take less than, I mean, even like 30 seconds sometimes, like, you will quickly find we are all the fucking same. So I'm greatly appreciate the idea that we are all connected. We are all connected, and I feel like that if we can just continue having these conversations and continue encouraging others to have these conversations, I hope that we can put a small dent in this idea that, like, it's okay. Like, everybody has cried before. Everyone's been angry before. Everyone's been sad before. Everyone feels that shit. It's like, why are we pretending like we don't, right? To kind of end it here, you know, I've got a couple things that I live by: learn, grow, change, you know, the whole live, love thing. Max got his thing. So is there anything that you want to share as like kind of a final note, or anything that you want to share, or that you feel like is like kind of your message to get out to people?
I think purpose is one of the biggest things that I hammer on. Is everything has to be done with purpose, and that's why, you know, Mac and I have talked about the Instagram algorithms and all that stuff, and you know, you need to post at a certain time and make sure you have this tag and hashtag and all this other stuff. And sometimes I'll go a week now without posting, because I'm not going to post just to post. There has to be a purpose. There has to be a reason behind it. And so I think it's so important for when you're trying to find your purpose isn't necessarily in something. It's in you. It's who you are.
Chills on that one, man.
Because that was the thing. Like, I felt like I had like my purpose when I was in law enforcement. You know, I felt like that's what my purpose was. And then once I got out of it, like, I had no identity.
But the purpose stays with you, though. I mean, maybe you didn't know it, but like I think what you're saying is, like, no matter where you're going, like, the purpose is I love that. That what you said about this goes back to my thing of, like, we are, like, I am the solution to all my problems. He is the solution to all his problems. You know, it's like, so I love that. That's good.
It's that I didn't like, being a cop wasn't my purpose. Loving people and making sure that people knew that they were loved, that was my purpose. And so I spent 8 months afterwards just in this deep dark hole, because I thought that's where I needed to be, and it wasn't. And it's funny now, because like all of my friends are like, still, I can't even believe like you were ever a cop. Like,
when you told me, I was like, there's no fucking way.
Well, yeah, and that's people were like, dude, you were like, I still don't believe you.
I like to imagine him walking around with a dog by his side in all black. That's the only image I have of him as a cop that I like, where he's like, doing some sneaky SWAT shit. Any other image of him in like in blue and black, and I immediately want to fight him. So
I was that guy that I pulled a lady over early in the morning. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. She's flying down the street. I pull her over. I walk up to the window, and this is just who I was. I looked in the window and I went, and she looked at me. She was like, and I was like, and she goes, "What?" And immediately though, her shoulders dropped, and I was like, "You ain't see me back there? I wasn't hiding or anything." And she was like, "No, I'm sorry. I'm on my way to work. I'm in a hurry." I'm like, "I tell you what, like, you don't have anything like bombs, bazookas, crazy stuff?" "No." I'm like, "All right." So let me just go back to my car and check, make sure you don't have any, warrants for murder or anything. Because I already knew I wasn't going to write her a ticket. I already made her even more late to work. Right. So like,
let me just follow my protocol real quick.
She already slowed down, and I realized, I was like, "Hey, just slow down until you get past that street. What do you do after that? That's up to you." But like, the look on her face was completely different than when I first stopped her. It was, maybe
it was a little human connection right there.
It's a human. Maybe she says, and that was kind of my thing too, was like, not all cops are the same. And so maybe she has that perspective. But I realized through my own trauma, through my own struggles, that my purpose is human connection and making sure that no one else, or that people who feel the way that I've felt before, not valued, not wanted, not loved, to where they can feel those things, to where they can feel loved, to where they can feel valued and feel wanted. So
fucking
that's
love
my
that.
purpose. So.
Well, Juan, I'm going to let Matt close it out, but I appreciate you coming out to talk. I fucking think you're, like I said, a secret genius. I'm glad I get to be a peer or acquaintance or maybe a friend, but really thanks for coming out. You can follow Juan at xjuanwilson, at X, just the letter X, Juan Wilson on Instagram, Twitter, the same thing. I'm going to let Matt close it out like I always do.
Danny, thank you as always.
You're welcome.
I love you. Danny won't ever say he loves me
I'll
back,
get there
but
someday.
I know that he does. Juan and Danny both know how important this kid is to me, and he's become about as important to them as well. Brandon, behind the cameras, thank you so much. This guy is so important to me. This conversation is so important to us, and I just hope for everyone that listens that if you don't get someone else to listen, that you at least carry some of this into your conversations moving forward, because these are really important conversations for men and women to be having together. If you guys want to join in any way, you know how to reach us. So much _podcast. Like, click, share, all that bullshit. Please do it. Even if you don't want to, we're begging you. We want more people to be able to engage in these conversations. And most importantly, Juan, I love you like a big brother. You are everything and more to me. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And with that, big love, everybody. We'll talk to you guys soon.